Welcome to the RSA conference. We're here recording live from Broadcast Alley in Moscone West. This interview is sponsored by Qwiet AI. I'm your host, Ben Carr, and joining me today for this interview is Chris Hatter, CISO at Qwiet AI. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here. It's a Monday at RSA, and I think you can kind of feel the energy right now. And it's kind of the calm before the storm. I personally have the most energy on Mondays before all the drinking really begins.
I think everybody has the most energy on Mondays, right? Yeah. So I started a little early. Was here yesterday, and so started early.
I was too. I had a fantastic sushi dinner last night. Got in, talked to a couple clients, and got a good kickoff to the week.
Very cool. So, look, I think for everybody, why don't you give us a little bit of introduction, background on yourself, and then talk a little bit about Qwiet AI, right?
Yeah, sure. So I joined Qwiet AI about a year and a half ago, the CISO in title, but I do a role that would really reflect of what a typical COO would do. I joined the company after leading cybersecurity at Nielsen for 7 years, so I went from big company to small company. Had the opportunity to work for Stuart McClure, our CEO and kind of AI expert.
Yep, Stuart's been around for a long time. I think a lot of people know.
And he convinced me that this technology that we use at Qwiet AI for application security is fundamentally different than everything else. We use something called code property graphs, and the code property graphs take code, it puts it into a graphical format, and then allows us to interrogate that graph to find security vulnerabilities. So we have a platform called Pre-Zero. It is made up of really three feature sets. One is SAST, the one is SCA, so SBOM, supply chain security,
sure.
And then the third one is AutoFix that we just released here at RSA today.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. So people may know Qwiet AI as Shift Left, right?
That's
like
right.
you guys, Qwiet AI, same company. So why is what you're doing fundamentally different than the way people have kind of approached this problem? I know you talked about the graph, but like a property graph, but I'm interested, can you dig a bit more into that?
Yeah, so for me in my last role, application security was a source of frustration. Honestly, it created more work than it actually helped me, in solving problems. We generated a lot of false positives, a lot of issues that our engineers would then get frustrated at having to actually work on. And so, like I said before, the appealing part was the code property graph. And when you could look at a holistic application statically, that's what really sets us apart from everyone else. Everyone else is basically, going file by file, interrogating raw source code, whereas we could look at the big picture all in one analysis. So when we actually run our analysis, it does all of that SAST, SCA, and even AutoFix all in one single shot.
And you just released AutoFix. That's kind of a new feature you're announcing?
Yes, we just released it. It's been a culmination of a lot of hard work from our engineering team. And, for me, it really gets at the heart of the problem. I think that for too long, discovering vulnerabilities in code has been, I don't want to call it easy, but that's what everyone's been doing. We've been discovering, and then we've been trying to find a way to prioritize, get it in front of engineers, but we never really gave them that superpower to actually fix the problem, actually remediate the code. And that, to me, is the next horizon for where we're going in application security. And I think you're going to see a lot of innovation around this space with generative AI and predictive AI, in our case, both blending together to really change the future of application security.
So I want to just jump back to that, but I'd like to start off maybe at a little bit different point and talk about, like, when I think about security and having been an operator for a long time, it tracks back to a human problem a lot of times for me, right? And so when I think about this and code security, it really tracks back to a developer issue, right? So there's obviously getting developers trained on security, getting them in a security mindset, but then getting them to actually adopt security tools, in my past experience, has been somewhat hard sometimes, right? Because I think you're dealing with a group of people that are, they don't see themselves as part of the security team, or if they do, they see themselves as differentiated for the team. So does your product work on any level to kind of address that and bring that gap together between developers and security?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that we focus a lot on. We obviously have to serve both of those teams. We serve AppSec and we serve developers.
Sure.
On the developer side, historically, we've been really focused on creating the context required to solve the vulnerabilities that matter most using the code property graph. So with our product, we tend to have less vulnerabilities that we would actually share with developers because we're mitigating the false positive issue. But that certainly isn't enough. So the thing that I found when I was an operator at Nielsen was that when you ask an engineer or developer to start context switching, so they want to be in a flow state. They want to be focused on building, their code, shipping products.
Yeah, because their job is about delivery, right?
They don't want to move to your security product that you arbitrarily bought and never told them about. They don't want to go to that UI, right? And so we've made it such that, let's just say you store your source code in GitHub, and that's where you're at. You're in GitHub, you're in Jira. We integrate directly with those. If you're a developer, you never even have to go into Qwiet's UI at all, right? So you don't have to context switch. Our UI tends for a lot of our customers to be the main point where the security team is assessing risk across an organization, whereas the developer can, if they want, go into the UI to get trained and kind of consume a richer result set.
So how are the developers getting alerted to when they have an issue in the pipeline when they're generating code, right? How are they getting alerted that, and how are they then creating remediation?
In PR comments as an example, right? Okay. So we integrate directly with the CI/CD systems that they're using, and when the scan is actually kicked off via CI/CD, we can put the vulnerabilities, the remediation, right into the pull request for them to review.
So do you typically, are you finding that you're selling into development side or security side, or is it a joint effort there? Do you have to hit both sides to actually get success?
It's definitely a joint effort, and for most organizations, not all, typically security is the budget holder, but the developers have an increasingly large say in what tool and capability is purchased. So we have an approach where we try to work with both teams. We try to create common ground between application security and developers, and typically, like I said, they have a large voice and they're the important actor and kind of almost a decision maker in many cases, whereas the AppSec team has the budget to actually execute the purchase.
Okay, so shifting back, if we, you said the new feature that you're releasing is this AutoFix capability. And I come from a long background in doing kind of attack surface management and working both in core like infrastructure vulnerabilities, but also on the AppSec side as well. And when I think about that, like auto remediation, auto fixing, right? There's been a hesitancy in the past to allow that because of the potential for unintended consequences or impacts that could happen. So how does your technology deal with that getting the adoption one, but then actually addressing that core question of like, how do you not cause unintended consequences, longer problems, issues for developers? How do you get them to adopt that AutoFix? And maybe you could dive down deeper into AutoFix and talk about how that works in real life implementation.
Sure, so I'll start with the high level of how it works, just in the interest of time. I've mentioned code property graph multiple times. Essentially what happens is when we interrogate the code property graph, we find a vulnerability. We take the graph and we bring alongside a little bit of source code along with that. And so we pair the code property graph and the source code to prompt an LLM. And so behind the scenes, we actually orchestrate multiple large language models. So depending on what the vulnerability is, what language you're talking about, we have an orchestrator behind the scenes that leverages what we believe to be the best models for those specific problem sets. And in our testing over the past year and a half or so, we have experienced things like LLMs hallucinating a package that doesn't exist or a library that doesn't exist. And we use our knowledge of the before, so what vulnerable code property graphs look like and what fixed code property graphs look like, and we take that information, decorate the source code with it, and do a few-shot prompting to the LLM to be able to actually fine-tune the result that comes out. And we've seen incredible results. It's definitely not perfect. I think we're at the beginning stages of what generative AI will be able to unlock for us in AppSec, but we're getting really, really close. I think that developer trust is something that we talk quite a bit about. The product right now is in a closed beta, and what we're doing is working with not only customers but prospects on giving us feedback. So we're generating the AutoFix. We have a team of people who are doing human reinforcement learning, giving feedback to the models, constantly improving the result sets that we're getting, but we're bringing now prospects and customers into that fold to help guide us in terms of the quality.
But you're using AI in the backside to help with that model training too, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you think about development, a lot of times I think about like empowerment, like creating that benefit of the developers as kind of the end user, the consumer of it, where they actually feel like they want to consume a technology, and that gets you to adoption a lot quicker.
Yep.
Like, how does that interface?
Yeah, I wish I would have answered that in the last response, but the other really big benefit that we haven't talked about yet is developer training. So I haven't seen, at least in my years as an operator, a really good developer training security capability that I was like, wow, this is really going to change the game.
It's really hard, yeah.
It's really hard to do, right? But what generative AI can do is that not only can we create a fix suggestion for you, and you could look at it, review it. We can also coach you. Why was the vulnerability, using your code, not using some generic template like what is SQL injection, right? We could look at your code, specify what are the gaps in the code that you wrote personally, and be able to educate you as a part of the process. So we think that there's some bidirectional benefit.
Are you doing any metrics or analysis on that? Like when you see, because that's again what I've seen from an operator side is when I look at the actual developers, some are better than others, right?
Yep.
And some teams are better than others, and part of that is trying to figure out where to target, like the training and the education on that. Do you feed that back into kind of the interface that the security team is looking at, so they can then actually try to figure out how to focus that, and then do you offer specific training around that as well?
Yeah, so in our find modules, so like the discovery of vulnerabilities, we today are able to show risk and assess risk across organizations, teams, applications, and different development groups will perform better than others. And you'll be able to see, hey, team A is producing more vulnerabilities over here than team B, and be able to dig in and ask why. Like, why is that? Typically, it comes down to, are they trained? Do they know and understand what they need to be doing? On the AutoFix side, it's absolutely something that we're going to be tracking. So you talked about developer trust. We're measuring when we generate an AutoFix, how frequently is it deployed with no modifications? How frequently is it deployed with some modifications? And how often is it just thrown in the trash, which is extremely rare? And so, yeah, we're measuring those things.
Do you have any? Is there any metrics right now that you have, like just in general, like on what you're seeing on that from the AutoFix
It's
side?
very early in the stage
sure.
from a beta standpoint, but we are seeing north of 75% of our fixes that are being able to be implemented with no modifications, and it's
wow, that's very impressive.
We're two-ish weeks into it.
Okay, and. What about tuning for performance, right? So a lot of times you can implement a fix on a security side, but there's an impact to performance. Are you seeing any pushback on that from the development teams?
We haven't yet, candidly. We expect to at some point run into issues like that, but to date in the beta, we haven't seen that.
Okay, so from a security side, like what's adoption look like? What's actually implementation of the technology look like? How does it get consumed, and how do people implement?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. We have a CLI. We integrate it directly with CI/CD platforms. You could do it in multiple ways, actually. I should say that. It's kind of whatever way you want to consume it, you can consume it, but our optimal implementation would be in CI/CD. We also offer IDE integration, so as developers are writing code, they get that immediate feedback. AutoFix will eventually be integrated directly into the IDE, so as code is being written in real time, we're able to provide feedback on a vulnerability and potential fixes. But yeah, most of our customers integrate directly with their CI/CD platforms and automatically kick off the find portion, and automatically kicks off our AutoFix solution. It's consumed, either in a UI or directly via APIs in terms of the results.
Okay, and I'm assuming integration with all major platforms. I mean, you mentioned, I think, GitHub several times.
Yeah, I mean, we're API first, so it's pretty easy for us to integrate with whatever. But I mean, your GitHubs, GitLabs, Jenkins, Circle, CI, you name it, we integrate with it.
So the AutoFix is certainly a big thing, but like, what's on the horizon? Where are you thinking out? What's kind of the next?
Yeah, good question. Our technology strategy is multifaceted, obviously. So we got AI AutoFix off the ground. We're looking very hard at pursuing what we're loosely calling autonomous application security. So with generative AI, the future is agent-oriented, autonomous agents. And so if you think about the role of an AppSec engineer and you think about the role of a developer, the AppSec engineer has a big job in the sense that when you identify a vulnerability, you should add context to it. So the tool and technology should do that, but at the end of the day, those application security engineers go out and try to prioritize. They use external sources, CAV, CVE, you name it, try to understand what threat actors are trying to compromise them, and they bring that information in as a way of prioritizing. We could use autonomous agents to do that. Similarly, we envision a world where if we could get the developer trust right, where not only are we generating an AutoFix, we're automatically creating a pull request, and we're implementing the code in a closed loop system. So that's one bit. The second bit, and to me this was, as an operator, was kind of like the holy grail. Our company was called Shift Left, now Qwiet.
Yeah.
Everything we do is at the left side of the development lifecycle. But there is a lot of context on the right side that's very interesting to us. So we do really well in understanding reachability in code
Okay.
because of the code property graph. We want to supercharge that by taking runtime context and kind of what we can get from cloud ecosystems and Kubernetes, and be able to supercharge that by understanding what compensating controls are in the environment, how have you set up your network, is it reachable from the outside. So creating that ability to say, do I have a reachable vulnerability from the outside and code? The combination of those two things are the highest things that you should be prioritizing. So that's what we're running after.
Well, thanks, Chris. Look, I think this has been a really interesting conversation. I think you guys are doing some really interesting things there. Look, for more information, please visit securityweekly.com/Qwiet AI and visit us on securityweekly.com/RSAC. It's been great having you here today, and I want to thank you. It's been a great conversation.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.